Oh, this is very good. The attendees numbers are ticking up. I'm Rick. I'm the host. Lovely to meet you all. We'll be starting in a minute. Just let the numbers tick up a little bit more. Right then, I think that looks pretty good for attendees numbers. That's a good time to start. First of all, thank you everybody for taking the time to join us. It's Wednesday. If you need a reminder what day of the week it is, it's Wednesday. I'm Rick Moore. I'm Head of Insight, Strategy and Planning at Kite Factory. And this is our webinar about COVID-19, looking at the impact on media and everything beyond. I'll introduce you to all the panelists in a second, but just to give you a bit of background about who we are and why we're doing this. So the Kite Factory are an independent media agency. We really focus on performance and effectiveness. Those are the really key things our agency's built on. 20 years expertise in that, delivering that for profit businesses and also for the charity sector, with a lot of charity expertise in the business. And by the attendees we have today, I know there's a lot of charities represented. Great to have you with us. We would say our specialisms are media, strategy, data and attribution, and we use those to drive growth for clients. Now, driving growth is particularly important at this time as we've found ourselves in the pandemic and trying to adopt to and adapt to everything that's going on, adopt new ways of working. As part of that, for our clients and for anybody who's interested, we've been producing mailers on a weekly basis. Aggregating what we're seeing from our tools, from our desktop research, what we're seeing from expert partners, and we've just basically been collating mail outs every week to keep people up to speed with developments and what's going on. As we've been going through those, feedback's been fantastic. It's been really positive, hence why we've kept going. And we just figured this was a good time to have a webinar. So rather than just Word documents going to you, you actually get a chance for us to talk through some of the findings we've had, see where we're going. And I think it sets up an interesting structure about what's going on now, what we're seeing, how people are behaving, what trends have we seen, and where do we see it going. So by the end of this webinar, hopefully you'll get some insights across all those spaces and give you some ideas of what to do. In the interests of set up what you're going to say, repeat and repeat again, I think the key things we'll say to you today are, if you have an opportunity to advertise at the minute, there are short-term benefits in terms of the pricing and availability of what you can do. If you have the chance to test and learn, there's great opportunities to test and learn, built around the new behaviours we're seeing in terms of how people are interacting with media in lockdown. And then finally, it's thinking about the next step. As we're going to talk to you about, we think we're entering into the third phase of this now. How do we plan for the longer term and what's going to happen as we enter this new world? And to do that, we've put together the panelists you see on the screen, very patiently waiting me to stop flapping my gums. I'm very happy. As I was putting today's webinar together, I got my wish list. Everybody I wanted said yes first time, so it's great. So you have my best pick for who we would have for a panel for this. So we have Lucy joining us from Channel 4. Lucy is heads up the client development over there. Somebody I've worked with for a number of years. Fantastic background, agency side, Stockholm Media Fest, MGOMD and MEC. Moved to Channel 4, you've been there about 3 or 4 years now, I'm right in saying, Lucy? Regular speaker at the Cannes Lions, an award winner there. So fantastic to have Lucy with us. Lucy will be talking about Channel 4's perspective. We were really interested in Channel 4. I think lots of different media owners have been very good at sharing information. Channel 4, absolutely one of the best. And we're going to be hearing a little bit about where they've been going in terms of how they've affected editorial, sales, marketing, and what responses they've seen, both from the industry and from viewers. I have Dr. Simon Moore in the corner down there, Dr. Simon Moore, no relation, who is the founder of Innovation Bubble. He's a chartered consumer psychologist, has worked, from rebranding of guide dogs through to in the finance sector and fashion and FMCG. He's brought a really interesting perspective that we're really interested in. As a department, working in the strategy department at the Kite Factory, we're really interested in behavioural economics. Simon almost pushes through that into the space of psychology and uses applied psychology skills to give us really interesting insights into what's driving consumers, both on a conscious level, they're willing to talk about, and an unconscious level. So we're going to dig into that later in the webinar. And then joining me from my team, one of our senior strategists, Will Richardson, down there. Now, Will and I spend a lot of time collating these mailers week in, week out, and we're chatting about the pandemic as it's starting to emerge out of China through the start of the year. Didn't really envisage we'd end up here, spread out across the world, but there we are. This, by the way, is wallpaper. This is not clever Zoom graphics. This is lo-fi. So that's our panel. I hope that works for you. We have the chat down the side of the screen, which the panelists can see. If you ask a question, you see it as an asker. All the panelists see it, and we'll pick those out probably in the final quarter of an hour. This is an hour long, once or two. So yeah, that's who we are. That's all the housekeeping. The only other housekeeping I put out is a caveat. If I say at any point it's a great opportunity or it's really interesting, I'm saying everything within the context of this awful pandemic we're in. I know it's affecting a lot of people, friends, families, be they key workers, be they people suffering with it. We wish everybody well, and I hope nothing comes off as hollow. I know, and you just accept that's the caveat we're setting this in. I hope that makes sense. So let's begin. And for this, I'm going to talk to each of the panelists in turn, but obviously we're going to jump in and talk to each other as well as we go through this. But I'm going to start with you, Will, and talk about what's been happening. So here we are, week 7 or 8 of lockdown. One of the questions we get asked a lot, well, with the strategists in the media agency, so what's going to happen next, and also what's going on. So we're going to try and answer both of those things today. Channel-wise, the channels we're seeing do really well are TV. Viewing figures are up with more people at home. We're seeing the kind of premium audiences you might see in the evening and peak spreading out through the day. As we're going to hear in a few minutes from Lucy, we've had the makeup of what the broadcast is putting out their schedule. That's changing. That's creating new opportunities in terms of context and things we can look at. It's also seen growth in VOD and more streaming services. Back in February, we were looking at the IPA analysis of Touchpoints 19, and they were looking at how TV viewing has really changed in the last 5 years. For the over 55s who are watching linear TV, they're watching more. For everybody else, they're watching less, but they're streaming more. Now we're seeing all those behaviors continue, but with moments where the audiences who are watching a little bit less being pulled into linear TV, being pulled into event moments on TV, which is why we're getting these fantastic viewing audiences. What that means is there's opportunity in linear TV, there's also opportunities to test in VOD. And again, we'll talk about uplifts on things like All 4, seeing 10% uplifts in terms of their archive. So TV seems to be the big success moment for everybody at home. Beyond that, we're seeing radio uplift. We've not got the spikes we would have for breakfast and drive time. People aren't commuting in the same way, but people are trying to keep to their normal routines and regimes. If you go up, you put the radio on, people are still doing that. The thing is, they're not turning it off. It's staying there in the home with them. Listenership's up. We're seeing Acast, the leading podcasting network. They're seeing record numbers of listeners. There were 11 million plays last week. That's going fantastically well. Social is up. We're spending more time scrolling. And what's interesting and divergent, Will, maybe this is a good opportunity to bring you in, is the changes of this. There's people who want to stay connected and informed, and then there are people who are wanting to be distracted. And we're seeing those sort of dichotomy of the two behaviors coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things, I think, is thinking about the kind of 3 lenses that we approach media planning through. So thinking about the context, and then the channel, and then the audience that we're speaking to. So what's the kind of when and the where, what's the environment that people are in, then the channel, how are we reaching these people, what formats, and the audience, obviously, who are we speaking to with these messages. And I think context has been one of the poor relations of those 3 over the past few years. I think the massive advances that we've had in tech and targeting have meant that we've been able to kind of reach people in all sorts of different environments, and context has perhaps fallen by the wayside a bit. But I think now more than ever, it's clear just how important context is in making those other decisions about audience and channel, because it has changed so dramatically in the past 6 weeks or so, and that's having a really profound impact on our channel selections and on the audiences we're speaking to and the messages that we're reaching out to them with. So, as you've said, we've kind of gone through these different phases over this period. We've had this initial panic, this real sense of unknown at that beginning period when everybody was realizing that there was this new reality coming and that we were going to have to lock down, and what would that look like and how long would it be for? All these really big questions that people had in their lives. And then we've kind of had this second phase, this, as you said, this kind of new normal, which has been perhaps the past month or so. So after a week of lockdown, people have got into a new routine, new behaviours are emerging. So, we have the Thursday evening claps for the NHS. We've had people taking part in the sort of Run 5, Nominate 5. And there's been, it's amazing how quickly people can adapt to new situations. And so we're seeing a lot of those kind of new things coming through. And perhaps now we're starting to turn a corner into what next. But I think, as you say, more on that perhaps later on. But certainly for this first month, that change in context has had some really profound impact on the way that people consume media. And we've spoken a lot in our chats, our regular chats, about home first being the kind of way that we've tried to package everything up when we're thinking about media. And I think when you start from that position, it becomes clear the implications that's had for all of the different media channels. As you say, TV has increased massively on a kind of live linear basis for those audiences that are perhaps becoming more problematic. So the younger audiences are watching more of those appointment to view spots. And as you say, it's kind of been this reversion to historic levels of viewing of live TV. We're seeing digital TV increasing as well. So things like broadcast VOD, video on demand. And connected devices have become really, really important. So another thing we spoke about recently was the definitions for different types of media channels, and how perhaps this new context has forced us to actually really pay attention to what we mean about different media channels. So what do we mean when we say digital, and what do we mean when we say sort of offline? And the big screen has become a real focal point as people spend most of their waking lives in their living room, and it goes from being the office one moment to the gym the next, to the playroom in the next hour. And that TV screen becoming the focal point as the device. And we've seen huge increases on people using YouTube on the big screen, whereas before perhaps they were using it on their commute. And also people using things like Spotify through connected devices in the house. So that's had a really big impact as well.
Yeah, and I think that the idea about the smart TV, the YouTube thing, about there's been a decline in people viewing YouTube on the app on their mobile devices, a growth in smart TV, and that's giving new targeting moments. So when we say things like test and learn, that's been really interesting. How, as people are shifting more to wanting to consume their content on big screen, how can we make that addressable? There's an excellent MediaTel article the other day about Samsung. We're just sharing Samsung penetration in the household still huge yet in the UK, but people accessing via the smart TV and what they're doing in terms of their behaviour is really interesting. And the home first becomes really, really interesting. If you think about how, like you say, through those different phases of how the home is being used, workplace, playgroup, gym, whatever, we can start thinking about how does the channel interact with that moment. So it's the classic content and context, but it's, as you say, it's drilling down, and context is more important than ever. For example, one channel we've seen starting to grow, door drops and direct mail, a physical way of getting into people's homes to signpost. So if you want to find a digital environment or digital space, it's a great way of signposting to go there. Likewise, if you can advertise on TV and you want to get a more emotional message out there, it becomes a very good way of underpinning that with a more rational message. If you don't want to, take time out from the emotional connection of the TV ad, you can follow up with door drops and rational. So that's been a channel we've really seen starting to pick up and grow. Out of home, as you can imagine, has suffered, and I think, but they've been very responsible as a channel, in terms of how they've helped advertisers defer bookings or cancel bookings. They've been very careful not to send staff out to paper and paste post. What's going to be really interesting is as we start to see relaxation, and I think all eyes are on Sunday and whatever the government says. We all know it's not going to be immediate. It's not going to be a ticker tape explosion and we're suddenly out the front door. It's going to be phased, it's going to be relaxed. But again, out of home is going to become a very, very crucial medium in terms of how people own that moment and are very present in that moment. Particularly when, as the sort of lessons we've seen from China, as people come out and they're very uncertain, they're very nervous about what they're going to be facing, how can we offer reassurance and how can we make them feel more confident about coming back out, and what messages they're going to want to see there. We talk about the 3 Ps. We talk about this idea of promoting. So that's a great way for brands to talk to people, is that people are wanting to hear. Opinion put out some marketing research about different categories, and for many categories, many people are saying we want to hear more from them. We don't want to be left behind. You know, they're crying out to hear, either for being informed or for a distraction. So again, the context, the environment you're in becomes really, really important. There's the practical. People want help, and I know that's something we've talked about a lot for charities. You know, charities often look for supporters by the very name to support them. At this time, how can charities support their supporters to build those longer term relationships that will last beyond lockdown and further beyond that? But also a very important thing, and this applies to anybody, brands or charities alike, is being able to give people purpose. The act of being furloughed, the act of not being able to go out, it's robbed a lot of people of a sense of purpose. Is there things we can ask of people? Are there activities we can engage them in, things we can give them to do that give them purpose? And they become really interesting questions. So promote, practical and purpose become the 3 Ps we ask people to think about. So, Will, that's been really helpful. Thank you for that. And I think all this discussion of media, like I said, one of the key channels for growth is TV. And that's why we were very glad we've got Lucy Gulliver joining us from Channel 4. Lucy, lovely to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. So, so Channel 4 have been brilliant from an agency partner point of view. Just the sheer amount of information you've been sharing out, your weekly infographics, your updates. But it's been a fundamental shift, but one you as an organisation seem to be really navigating well. And it'd be really good if you could take us into a bit of the insight about what the decisions that have been going on at Channel 4 and how they've been playing out into what we see on the channel.
Sure, no problem. So as an PSB that's funded by advertising, you know, yes, it's been brilliant to see the enormous increases in viewing, but it also poses a huge challenge to us because we're paid for by the money we make from advertising, and when that plummets, as obviously happened through March and April, it gives us a mix of huge challenge, but also huge opportunity. You know, to paraphrase Dickens, it was the best of times and the worst of times, and those sorts of challenges force you to get creative. And as an organisation, from programming to marketing to sales, innovation, creativity is kind of the lifeblood of Channel 4. We're also conscious in difficult times that we've got a responsibility to the public. And then we have to keep getting news out there. We've got to make sure we're being responsible in how we're reporting the news, and also not losing our edge in challenging what the government are doing, holding them to account, looking into science and research and understanding the front line, how communities are responding. We also know we've got a responsibility to lift the mood, because it can't all be doom and gloom. You know, the first 2 or 3 weeks of lockdown, viewing to news channels was up 124%. You know, Channel 4 News has hit an 8-year high. But that's, you know, that first few weeks in that panic, you needed the reassurance and the understanding of what was happening on a regular basis. But you also need some time out from that. And as we're moving through lockdown, we're seeing people want to come back to joy and uplifting programming. So we've had a real challenge on our hands, which is how do we keep our programs on air when we can't be in studios, we can't be in people's houses, we've got to socially distance, we've got to keep the country running. So we dug deep and we kind of set up an internal crisis group, which featured everyone from commissioning to just the kind of operational side of it, from sales to marketing, to kind of think about how we could react quickly, innovatively, dig deep, you know, find a way to keep Channel 4 running, but also be useful and helpful and positive in the way that we must do. So we looked at on-air comms. So how did we speak to the nation? So you would have noticed really quickly in the top left-hand corner of your screen, we immediately put we call it a dog, an on-screen graphic that said stay at home. We then got comms out there. We got all of our talent to shoot from in their homes, what they were doing to, you know, under the stay at home banner. So Jon Snow was ironing ties and Scarlett Moffat was sorting socks. So we had about 20 different Channel 4 talent who produced really quickly, shot in their own homes, and we got them on air. Just, you know, reminders in a very quirky Channel 4 way that even our own talent was staying at home, and it's really important to do that. We put out a really quirky Channel 4 video reminding people just to keep their butts on sofas. Programming, obviously, huge challenge. So we had to adapt how we shot our shows. So Gogglebox has been one of the huge beneficiaries of increased viewing, but we couldn't have people in their homes anymore. So we had to really quickly put fixed rig cameras in. The producers are sat outside on driveways in vans. We launched a brand new daytime show called The Steph Show, which was supposed to be one of our first big launches from our new Nations and Regions headquarters in Leeds. Steph was doing that from her living room. with a newborn baby, with the, you know, the soundman outside the patio doors and the producing team in the garage. You know, we adapted. It's what you do in crisis. You look at, you've got to work around the edges, you find new ways of doing things. We also turned around a really fast strand of programs we called the Stay at Home Academy, which was all of our talent, all of our independent producers, because we have a, you know, a duty to support the independent production sector. So we put challenges to them, which is help us, how do we get programming on air quicker, cheaper, faster, you know, slightly more rustic. You know, you would have seen Gulliver was one of the first we put out with his Keep Cooking and Carry On. You know, he moved into a part of his house that with the acoustics were better. He padded his walls with sofa cushions, stuck an iPhone to the ceiling, had his kids and wife filming, so you can get the same kind of angles you get from a usual cookery show. You know, we had talent coming to us with ideas like Kirsty's Keep Crafting and Carry On. We've got Richard and Judy coming back for a book club from their own living room, and lots of it was about reassuring nostalgic formats that you want in these times of stress. So crafting, cooking, reading, you know, practical things that were useful. Grace and Perry's doing an art club for us. Matt Lucas is doing a lovely show all upon, you know, about joyousness. So we, you know, turn these programs around quickly, find new ways to do things. In sales, we were no less innovative. We immediately wanted to find ways to support our agencies and advertisers. So reducing AB deadlines, coming up with new initiatives where we've opened up the services of our award-winning full creative team who do our marketing to help advertisers who want to get on air in this period but can't access an ad agency, don't have an ad agency. You know, we can help you get on air. We've got incentives to spend with us. At the minute, obviously, because viewing is through the roof, TV is always good value, but at the moment we're seeing it being about 50% cheaper than it was this time last year. There has never been a better time to encourage new to TV advertisers. We know the benefits of advertising at the moment are unfounded. If you can stay on air and you can talk to your consumers, do so. We appreciate those challenges, but look at the brilliant ways that all brands have turned around. You know, UGC content, they've shot exactly as we are doing now. They've shot adverts like this because we know we need to be useful and practical but uplifting. Our research team turned around a really quick piece of insight because we have 4 youth and call for panels that we're really engaged with. We can get a really quick temperature check on how's everyone feeling, what do they want from advertisers. If you go to the 4 Sales website, you can access it yourself. It's, you know, out there for you to use. And then from a staffing perspective, you know, we are creative and innovative in how we support our staff. So we have had amazing mental health support online. We've had our online hub has become a place to go for everything you need, from IS to, you know, extra apps, whatever you might need. We've been doing regular updates, video updates from senior management. We've had regular drinks, sort of like team drinks, you know, 4 Sales wide drinks. So just basically finding ways to keep the staples of our business going, being innovative, being creative, and obviously the output you'll mostly see is our on air. So that was, you know, the number one, let's keep the nation informed. Let's make sure Channel 4 News is on air. We're being innovative and creative, even in terms of how we report on the crisis, lifting the mood. You know, our shows, SAS, Gogglebox, Celebrity Bake Off have been enormous. I mean, we're talking 4, 5, 6 million viewers. We've got more shows doing over 4 million than we had, you know, last year. The Stay at Home Academy, you know, all these sort of things are all around the fact that we know people are at home watching TV. TV is informative, it's lifting, it's nurturing. People have come together for movie night. You know, parents have let their kids watch all of the Star Wars series. We've done practical things, we've done useful things, informative things. And it, you know, all 4 viewing is always enormous, but I think what's interesting is seeing the numbers of all 4, where our 16 to 34 audience have migrated to. We're seeing, you know, 45% increases in young adults watching linear TV, and that's not just daytime viewing, which was up about 60%. This is like late peak viewing. So that's why all these big shows are doing really well. People in times of need come together, they sit in the living room. I think shared viewing is up about 37%. So, you know, we've recognised we have to adapt as a business. We want to support advertisers, but viewing, programming, that's the heart of our business, and that's where we've wanted to make sure that we are supporting everyone that needs help right now, but also giving them a good laugh, you know, uplifting. That's why Gogglebox is the most joyous programme right now, because you wouldn't think the nation would want to sit at home watching TV, watching people watching TV, but we do, because we always want to know how everyone else is feeling. And at the moment, feeling connected is, you know, vital.
Lucy, that was fantastic and so helpful to hear how you've adapted in so many different ways, but also the heart of that was this sense of agility. you setting up the crisis team. I think that's something really interesting. I think for a lot of clients on the course, I want to really emphasize, because I think, there's nervousness. What's the right thing to do? We don't want to be caught out. We don't want to look like we're being inappropriate. But having that real-time way to react and having the senior ability to empower that, to enable that to happen, and that's one of the great keys for people who are navigating this crisis well. It's really good. So it's wonderful to have that. Thank you so much for that insight. You talked a lot there about wanting to support people and offer help. And that very neatly brings us to Dr. Simon Moore from Innovation Bubble, who's very patiently been waiting in the bottom quadrant of the screen there.
This has been a welcome relief from homeschooling and algebraic equations. So I'm more than
there you go. Well, there you go, my friend. Well, look, so much interesting stuff there about people wanting different things. From Channel 4 is one example. From Will talked about the different channels and the way they were working. We've talked a lot about the work you've been doing in New Zealand over there, and in terms of how they've been reacting. So one of the things we talked about was this idea of what people say, the conscious thing and the unconscious. We dig into that a little bit and what you've seen.
Yeah, sure. And it's a kind of nice segue from kind of what Lucy was describing. I was kind of listening with interest, because maybe unbeknown to her, she was mentioning a lot of emotional kind of connections there. So, social contact, social interaction, the kind of whole emotional thing we might be missing with kind of colleagues at work, friends and stuff. So we kind of turned to the TV for that. So, and it was kind of on the coattails of that we got involved in a project in New Zealand. So this was part sponsored by the government and part sponsored by agencies, but it was, how can we really tap into what is going on in the sort of the population mindset, but obviously they're all consumers. So this is pretty important in terms of health comms and brand comms, and how do we engage with it? How do we communicate? What do we do from a strategy point of view with these people? So one of the things we did, we designed, one of our tools is an online engine that looks pretty much between what people say they kind of think is happening and how they feel and how they really feel. So we kind of did a screen on this through the New Zealand population, and it was actually quite fascinating, because if you take it on the brand point of view, a lot of the brands were saying, well, we're pivoting, and we've heard, Lucy described quite well how Channel 4 is pivoting. Other brands are pivoting not as well, or maybe a bit more misinformed how they're pivoting, but a lot of the commonality was around, we're trying to pivot, but our comms are not actually engaging or making a difference. So the dials aren't moving much in our consumer audiences. Why is that? Because we're asking them and they're telling us, and we're reacting to that, and nothing really is kind of moving as a result of that. So what's going on? So, and it was quite fascinating. We've talked about it. So what we found was that what people are saying, so for example, you take millennials in New Zealand, they were saying that they feel very informed, they feel quite secure, that they feel quite connected on a kind of conscious level. What's quite shocking though, on an emotional, non-conscious level, they weren't at all. They were pretty feeling disconnected, insecure, pretty ill-informed. And so what happens was all the organizations and the brands and the government, the health ministry, for example, we're trying to engage their comms based on the fact that, we think they're informed, we know they're secure because they're telling us they feel secure, they feel connected. We don't have to talk about those kinds of things. So let's talk about other things. And as a result of that, obviously what was happening is that those comms were completely missing their target, because people weren't satisfied in any of those kind of areas. So that was interesting. And then if you take the other spectrums, if you take older adults that were 70 plus, it was interesting because, and this is particularly probably relevant to sort of non-profit charity organizations, they were saying that they felt fairly sympathetic and empathetic with what was happening. And you would have think, okay, that's great, because then they'll start helping. At a non-conscious level, their sympathy levels were non-existent. Oh. So you could see anyone trying to kind of get any sympathetic reactions out of them were going to fall on a sort of dead ears, because they were not feeling it at all. They were too busy managing their own stress levels, too busy trying to find out what this means to them to really worry about other people. So it's really fascinating. What people tell you and what they feel is completely different. And so this can really either make or break your kind of engagement and your strategy in terms of your audiences, really.
Oh, interesting. We've actually we've had a question that relates to this. Could you talk a little into how you did the unconscious tests to work out the emotionally stressed?
Yeah, so I'm, depending on your viewpoint, I'm either really lucky or unlucky to work with a load of psychologists here at Innovation Bubble. So psychology is a little bit like medicine, so you have lots of different disciplines. So we've got some neuroscientists, we've got some psychometric people, and over the last 6 years, we've developed an engine that works very quickly, and it works with images, because we know the brain processes images more quickly than it does semantics. And we also know that the brain has less biases to image evaluation than it does words as well. So we have a kind of an engine that's designed to kind of think about what are people saying that they associate with things, and what in reality emotionally do they feel about that. And what you say and what you feel are two different systems in terms of kind of human decision making. And so without boring people, we've got a statistical system behind the scenes that works at 90% kind of, I suppose, probability or assurance that we can differentiate between those two systems. And it's based on time response. It's based on correlating different types of questions about, do you like yellow? I won't ask you once. I'll ask you that question in 4 different ways to be assured that actually, Rick, you're telling me you like yellow, but actually you prefer orange. So that's how it works. And it takes about 7 minutes. And we use it in all sectors. So we've used it in asset management, used it in charity work. Guide dogs used it, for example, and we found out some really interesting stuff there. But it's a really interesting tool to kind of reveal that kind of difference between, I'm telling you something that I think is real. And it's not that I'm lying, it's just that I'm not aware. Humans are not very good at describing how they feel. They're not very good at describing their emotions. And so this is a quite unuseful tool in capturing that. And then what we do as a basis of that, we then use psychology interviews to dig down and say, well, why is that happening? And once you know that, so that's where the sweet spot is. If you know why, then you can change stuff. Yeah. So, brands often, they'll kind of use data on age, they'll look at spend, they look at things like how often people hover on kind of web pages, what they click. It's useful, but it's a very conscious kind of observed piece of data. You don't know why they're doing that. Just because someone's looking at an image longer than anyone else actually might mean that their visual processing ability is slower. It's not that they're interested or they don't understand it. They just actually take slower to process the image. So it's quite important. This non-conscious stuff is pretty vital in actually stripping away all those biases to think, actually, is there another pattern that we need to worry about here?
And when we've chatted about it in the past, it's using that tool to look at where those shortfalls between the claimed behaviour is and that unconscious drive to try and look for those gaps. Because then it becomes the stickiest place where if we're showing media behaviour or placement or, again, the context we talked about or what we might engage with media partners like Channel 4 to create the right sort of content to answer those needs.
Yeah, that's right. So if you think, think of people's finances, if I asked you, are you pretty happy with your bank accounts and your bank, you'll say, no, I don't really trust my bank. Probably in reality, though, is you probably don't trust your own financial capability. So most people know if they're in debt or not in debt. If I asked you what your base rate is on your savings account, you'll be like, not sure. If I asked you about what does your bank invest in, you're probably not sure. So that's the difference. And if you can understand that stuff, then you can engage. So one of the things we're finding actually at the moment is this whole situation has changed people's mindsets from opportunity and potential gain. So, what are brands going to offer me and where they're going to take me, to the psychology of what can I keep? What can I maintain? What can I secure? So it's become much more defensive. We're in a much more convergent mindset now. So, brands, I don't know about you, but I still get things in my inbox about new products out there. And I'm thinking, you're kidding. I'm just about kind of keeping hold of what I've got. I've got no capacity to think about new things at the moment. I'm too busy spinning plates of, control, security, kind of understanding. So those kind of messages are going to probably cause more harm than good. So we've been working with clients to kind of understand that psychology reality, to kind of help them, I suppose, engage and communicate in more effective ways that are going to work. And it could be quite counterintuitive what you'll find on the non-conscious level. Just because you assume a reality doesn't mean to say that it is reality. Someone might tell you they like yellow, but actually deep down they prefer red, and for whatever reason you haven't unlocked that real response. Sure.
Well, that's been very helpful, and I think it ties into something, Will, you were saying earlier, which was about this the notion of, you know, it's accelerated change. And it's when we make different decisions and when we're more likely to move, you know, change a behaviour, change a way we do things, buy a different brand because of the situation we find ourselves in. That would seem to tie very neatly with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we look at quite often, you know, outside of this situation as well, is, you know, how do you actually really drive lasting behaviour change for clients? And, you know, as you said, one of the key things that's come out of some of the research is that, you know, when there is a time of significant change in somebody's life, that is often the point at which their habits might change when they have those disruptions. So one example that's often been used is people with a 9 at the end of their age often do quite different things to everybody else because they start to come into this mindset of, perhaps I'm moving into a new decade, and, you know, what does that mean about who I think I am? Should I have bought a house by this age, or should I have, you know, done these other things? So we often see the 9ers, as you might call them, behave slightly differently. Another example that gets used quite a lot is a tube strike a few years ago. They monitored how people's commuter patterns were affected by, you know, all of the tube network basically shutting down. And whilst the majority of people changed their route for the couple of days they couldn't do the normal commute and then went back to what they were doing before, there was actually a significant proportion of people who stuck to their new route. And it had actually been the disruption of being forced to actually think about their commute that had made them realise that their previous habitual behaviour wasn't the optimal, and that actually this new thing was a better way of getting to work, and so they stuck with the new one. So, you know, there are instances in this kind of situational change where perhaps people might be re-evaluating some of these areas in their life that have just become sort of lost in the mundane sort of day-to-day behaviours from before.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as we talk about the phasing that you referred to before. This idea, we went through the panic phase, there was the novelty of a lot of the new normal, and now we're into this extended new normal, and people are, with the time they've got, taking stock of things. A shout out to NFP Synergy, who a lot of charity attendees hopefully know, are doing fantastic work with updated trackers about how people are engaging and giving. They just published Wave 3 last week. One of the things that was very interesting out of that data was the suggestion that the implication there may be a finite amount of people willing to donate money, and then as they're starting to give, and, you know, we've seen, you know, the fantastic money raised by Captain, now Colonel Tom Moore, and people giving there, having given, are they going to continue to give? Is there a finite pool, and is it getting smaller? So that idea of how can you maintain relevance, you know, supporting the supporter, and that shouldn't be just down to charities. That should be down to any business. How can we look after those people? That practicality. How can we offer help? And, you know, Channel 4's example of educating when you need it, entertaining when you need it, informing when you need it. That's a great example of how that's coming into play.
Even thinking about what we want to do for programming from here to the end of the year, we're starting to move away from this sort of like panic support phase into finding new joy. People want positivity. They want to look at life returning to some sort of normality. We're hoping the shifts that we see in terms of TV viewing will probably remain not as high as they are now, but they will remain higher through to the end of the year, which will partly be driven by the fact that we won't be going back to nightclubs and cinemas and holidays. We will be at home a lot more. We will be with our families a lot more. And also we're just be forming new habits. We're reminding ourselves actually there's quite a lot of joy in watching TV together or watching those kind of shows. And also, you know, unfortunately, we're going to see rises in unemployment, which often means people are going to be at home more, they'll be safer with their money, they'll be less risk averse. What we then see from that is people turning, without realising it, sort of going back to unconscious bias, you turn back towards brands you trust and you're used to. So kind of enduring power of advertising and big brands who always emotionally communicates. There's kind of more right brain advertising that advertisers have moved away from. They've been much more practical the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Those emotional bonds become really important at times like this. So you gravitate back towards brands that you feel safe and secure with, that you feel have supported you, that you feel offer you practical support. There will be slight shifts towards trying new things as a bit of a treat. When we come out of lockdown, you might go and buy that more expensive lipstick, or you might, you know, give yourself a little immediate treat, but then the fear will set in about where is the economy going, what happens in a recession, and that's where you see a return to slightly more habitual things. So you want to watch those TV shows, you want to see those brands you've long associated with being safe, secure, fun, you know, the things you're used to, because you want trust and reassurance with positivity and joy. So, you know, there'll be interesting shifts, I think. And, you know, I hope people donating to charities remains, because charities are one of the growing sectors on TV advertising, because we've all got a much more community, altruistic perspective at the moment, whereas, you know, travel and retail are all down. It's nice to see government messaging go up, because we'll probably, where we all hated experts through Brexit, we're maybe now leaning back towards wanting to know what the experts think, because it's really important for our personal life choices. So there's interesting shifts, but I still think that there'll be a lot of sort of almost like unconscious habitual stuff we'll start to lean into, because it just feels a bit safer.
And to pick up on a theme within that, this idea of thinking about the longer term, that's where we're starting to plan for as an agency. And it's, I think there's three scenarios we're looking at, and the key thing to stress is they're not mutually exclusive. They will probably overlap and interrelate. The first scenario is what happens if we have relaxed lockdown or pulsed lockdowns. I've seen in Germany, you know, stop, start, stop, start. What happens in scenario two is a positive situation, which is we're out, it's contained, you know, it's contained within reason, with the whack-a-mole sort of model, this idea of when it erupts, we'll try and stop it. But there's this resurgence. So what does the end of year Q4, when everybody's trying to get out there, make up for lost time, and also own that moment? That's going to create almost like an extended Black Friday. How do you react to that scenario? Through to what you alluded to there, which is this longer term, you know, economic depression, you know, high unemployment. How are we going to navigate that? Now, elements of those three strands, I think, are going to overlay with each other, interlink. So we're starting to think about how we can help our clients navigate that. But also, for anybody listening in, that's probably the third action we would take. We've talked about, if you can advertise, taking advantage of, you know, the excellent pricing and the opportunities they're on at the minute. Secondly, it's about testing and learning in terms of the new behaviors we're seeing, you know, more people maybe streaming, more people using a different type of app. Back to the traditional, reframing the way people thought about direct mail as a way of being a digital signposting, through to this idea of how you plan for the long term in the midst of whatever mix of those three scenarios we get, using some of the skill sets Simon talked about to understand what's motivating people and how we can be there for them in the most relevant way, because that relevance will build those connections over time that Lucy alluded to. But also, to Will's point, if they are experiencing change and they are going to choose a new way of working, how are you, that brand that's acted in the correct way, in a way that's appealed to them, that's relevant to them, that means something? We always go back to that idea about behavior changes, understanding what your audience's goals are, what they really want to achieve. And if you can help them and be relevant and take them on that journey, that's when they'll engage with you, and that's when you'll drive growth. And again, as we talked about at the top, we're all about performance and growth and trying to make sure the brands we work with succeed. That's the way it's going to happen. Notice that Bob Monkhouse basically brought all three strands together. A small pat on the back for that. Also on time, which is very good to see. So Sophie Smith had asked the question about the unconscious test. We asked that. Please, if anybody's listening in, they want to ask any more questions, do fire them in on the panel over there. That's interesting. Just while that you may be thinking about that, I want to ask something. I want to throw a question to Lucy, which is, with your view of the entire ad market, what sectors are engaging and what aren't? You've talked there about charity, and when we've seen that, it is a very interesting time for charities. We know, you know, a lot of staff have been furloughed in that sector. There have been challenges around how more traditional ways of fundraising, you know, the cancellation of events, the loss of the London Marathon, the loss of face-to-face fundraising that way, has seen that influx of investment into the more traditional media channels, you know, the TVs of this world, digital, trialing of radio. What other categories are you seeing? What a Channel 4's perspective on which categories are coming in there?
So we've been doing a lot of work in sort of bringing new brands onto TV. We've been doing that work anyway, but now is obviously an amazing time. So it's sort of fitness apps. So when people couldn't go to the gym, you know, I found myself using a fitness app and then thinking, hang on a minute, everyone should want to use this. So we've seen sort of home utilities that are app-based really growing. So whether it be like food delivery services or Deliveroo, Uber Eats, those sorts of brands that are really useful, that can take not advantage, because it sounds really callous and Machiavellian. It's not that. It's just how actually your service is becoming more important to people right now. So fitness apps, anything in-home learning, we've been speaking to people about who sort of do app-based education, that sort of stuff. Obviously, we've seen, you know, FMCG brands have actually done quite well out of this because we all really need them. Where we've seen declines, naturally, the travel sector is in free fall, which is, you know, terribly distressing for, I've got friends who work, you know, as cabin crew, things like that. But, you know, so airlines have been hit hard, but we have started to see some resurgent green shoots from sort of aggregators like booking.com and those sorts of people who do want to start giving, again, positivity, joy. Where can you get to at the moment? What is an option for people? You know, motoring sector, automotive market has been down sort of 97%. However, where they are coming back and talking to us, we're starting to see people asking questions around sponsorship, because sponsorship has always been one of the best long-term ways of communicating with an audience. It doesn't have to, you know, it's not offer-based. It's about keeping your brand relevant even at a time, because cars are a longer-term purchase. We know from speaking to our viewers, people aren't cancelling those decisions, they're just delaying them slightly. So actually, if you can get on air, you haven't got the money for whatever reason because of your business infrastructure's got impacts globally, you can speak to consumers regularly through sponsorship. We're seeing ad-funded programming. So as a broadcaster, we make none of our own shows, everything's commissioned. The independent production sector is something we're really, you know, it's important we keep supporting them. So we have thrown the doors open at Channel 4. We've had some great success in the last couple of years with advertiser-funded programming, where brands co-fund our TV programmes. We're seeing lots of queries coming through from all type, banking, retail, all sorts, wanting to make shows with us, because going back to the emotional side, when it's difficult to work out what you want to say to people, but you want to stay relevant, you want to stay a part of their lives, and you want to be supportive through this time and share some positivity, leaning into a programme content sector is a way of doing that. So we're just seeing, you know, belt and braces stuff like sponsorships becoming more important again, you know, content-based stuff is more important again. We've got a new digital product we're launching soon that people are leaning into. You know, if you're a travel brand, you don't want to stop speaking to people, but right now, what can you do? So finding ways you can communicate, finding ways you can be relevant to an audience, those sort of behavioural shifts is where we're seeing advertisers become agile and try and find, you know, ways around the edge of what they would like to do normally. That being said, we're definitely seeing, as we sort of go towards May and June and July time, that we are seeing lots of brands come back into the market, want to spend, want to communicate, want to advertise, whether it's just staying on air from brand, whether it's having a product or a service that's useful. We are seeing green shoots of growth from all sectors, which is hopefully positive news for all of you.
Well, it raises two very interesting themes. Number one, Will was talking about the phases before, and I think, you know, we've gone through that. We're in the midst of this April, May, you know, very depressed, you know, huge drops in everybody's market share and investment. June, July, as there's a relaxation, certainly a lot of conversations happening, a lot of interest in coming back into those months, and this idea of reopening and this emergence, and how can people be active in that moment when people will hopefully find it easy to engage. And then there's the point even beyond that, which I think that long-term planning piece is about, you know, the August and beyond, when it is, nobody can rationally sit there and say, we definitely know what's going to happen. We can make a lot of reasoned conjecture, but how can you plan for those different scenarios and different ways of working? So that becomes really interesting in terms of how you talked about, you know, the opening up, certainly the engagement at those different times. Also, you talked about, you know, even travel advertisers who probably, you know, we can all think about probably the worst possible hit by what's going on. One thing we've seen is the growth. We often talk about owned and shared pay. And I know it's not bespoke to us in any way, shape or form. But I do think shared is often underutilized, and we're seeing a lot of shared conversations, a lot of brands trying to collaborate together to achieve the same goal. When you don't have the huge amount of budget available to you, if you can find somebody going on a similar mission to you, now it might be a charity partnering up with a corporate, it might be two corporates working together, but trying to get more noise than possible. That seems to be a conversation we're having a lot. And again, as part of that longer term planning, who would those ideal partners or categories be, and how do you work with them in a way to grow the exposure your business has? That seems to be a very crucial question we can get. Right, I'm conscious of the time. I'm conscious, there was that question, hopefully there was an, I didn't get the name, it was an anonymous asker, that last question about where Lucy was seeing investment in Channel 4. Hopefully that addressed that. We've addressed Sophie's question about unconscious tests. Any more for any more? I can't see any furious messages saying people typing, people in. So what I would say is, obviously you can see all our names in the bottom of our quadrants, hopefully. We're very, very findable on LinkedIn. Also, our email address at the Kite Factory are firstname.surname@thekitefactorymedia.com. Please, you know, we can obviously get in touch with Lucy or Simon through us, and we can field any questions offline. But I really appreciate it. We've held the participant numbers very well, so hopefully we've been of use. Or there's people now screaming at a laptop going, they didn't talk about this, they didn't get that. But hopefully we'll try. If we didn't answer anything you wanted to do give us a shout. But thank you to all those of you who spent the time with us on this webinar. That's really appreciated. But I'd like to take the time to thank Lucy from Channel 4 for that excellent insight. You know, so much good detail allowed, particularly about the agility and the agility of the organisation, how they pivoted. To Simon, some more from Innovation Bubble, for the insights about unconscious versus conscious decisions and how important that is. If we can really understand what's motivating people, how can we connect with them, and how can we talk to them in a way that is most relevant, because that's when we know we'll experience change. So Simon, thank you so much for that, so helpful. And to Will, as always, great conversation with you, and really, really good insights there into, you know, some of that, side of the psychology, some of that behaviour change, some of the phasing we're seeing for different media behaviours. Oh, one thing, great. We've had somebody loving Gogglebox.
Oh, everyone loves Gogglebox. It's just joy.
It's joy, and it's great telly. And the question to us,
great telly about great telly.
Great telly about great telly. It's also, if you're time poor, it's a lovely way to catch up what's going on. What it ruins is if you've been saving up a box set or saving up something, it's terrible for spoiler alerts. A nightmare for that. Often, many times you have to dive off and fast forward to do it. My wife has a huge problem with the family who have the dog, and they always have the feet up, and there's always food by the feet. That's a huge thing. But apart from that, apart from her tension during that bit, a great show. So glad that's working out. Gogglebox is going so well. Love Dave the Rotty. Nice. I think that brings us to a close. Enjoy everybody's Wednesday afternoons. Thank you to all our panelists who've been excellent. I really enjoyed that. And thank you for spending Wednesday lunchtime with us. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, bye.